Don't worry, on a catch pastor, they listen to Gangsters Paradise. If you don't know it, find it. Might be a little too early for some of you. Some of us were born and we listened to and grew up on Coolio's music. Find Gangsters Paradise, a kind of sort of describe the country into which you and I have been born. So, once again, good morning, everybody. Um, one of the things that comes with learning to preserve memory is that the preservation of memory assures that we do not become accustomed to madness to the point where we become acculturated to it and we normalize it. So, because we mustn't become used to madness, we must make a point of remembering the absurd that has happened to us. One of those is the normalization of missing children. There are still 39 children with terrorists in the bushes of Oyo State. 39. Let that sink in. But when that has finished sinking into your consciousness, also remember they are but the tip of the iceberg. There are many other children in terrorist hideouts held hostage by terrorists across the length and breadth of Nigeria. We speak to the ones in Orire, or to be specific, we speak of the ones in Oyo State because this is directly related to us. The ones we've been hearing of were far off, but this is pretty close to home. Even though I believe it was like 6 years ago or more, there was something in Igbonla, just in Ekpe here. But that seemed to have abated, but this one is pretty close to home. And it's not about one or two kids, it's about 39. 39. And the advertised importance of the Nigerian state. So do not get tired of remembering the fact that there are 39 children stuck with terrorists. And the Nigerian state that is very well capable of willy waving when it comes to any other thing, conveniently becomes impotent when dealing with terrorists, either by reason of complicity or by reason of incapacity. I believe is a combination of both. But that is not my subject for the day. But I must also all just never forget these kids remain in terrorist custody. And the Nigerian state, the same one that is capable of chasing down every other person, especially those who have something to say different from what the government wants repeated, is incapable or unwilling to rescue them. 39 children, some as young as 2. Yeah, the Nigerian state has done nothing for them. But let's talk about the week that was. In the week that was, in the week that was, this very week that just finished, in which me and you are beginning a new one. In that very same week, we had all manner of madness that happened. But they happened so that we may have a window into how the Nigerian state truly works. So let's deal with them one by one. In that week, it was first reported by a gentleman, at least that was where I saw it for the first time, known as English Alaji. And he told of a battle between terrorists, Lakurawa on one hand and Dogongida on the other, a Fulani terrorist and Lakurawa terrorists clashing in a place known as Kaboji. Now, he said, and he posted a video showing a Nigerian police helicopter that has the registration number 5N-MNS belonging to the Nigerian police, supposedly used by Dogongide to evacuate his wounded Fulani terrorists. These terrorists were evacuated using a Nigerian police helicopter. Was Dogongide fighting for the Nigerian police? Is he now an operative of the Nigerian state? This is a notorious Fulani terrorist. It was videoed in Kaboji. The synergy between the Nigerian state and terrorists of all hues is suggestive of an incestuous relationship that is only ending up producing persons terrorizing the Nigerian people, or shall I say victims. In the week that was, a minister of the Nigerian state brought up what he considered a revolutionary idea. And that revolutionary idea is that we should all start, they should switch from khaki, as bad as the khakis are, and move to Adire so that we can Nigerianize the NYSC and save money on importing khaki or whatever it was that he thought was the brilliant idea behind that idea. Question is this: which of the Adires are we talking about? Are we speaking of the Adires imported from China or the ones that are going to be made from cloth, plain cotton or other material imported from China? Brainwaves from the mongrels who are ruining our country. I must, when we speak of all the things that ails our country, I'm realizing that it's also important sometimes when we see positive things that happens in a fashion not suggestive of a place like ours. When we see positive things, we should also spend time celebrating them. And I must celebrate Alex on here. When I see the magic, the miracles that the man is performing in the education space, where he's intervening in the maths and STEM space, using private sector effort leveraged against his own expertise and human endeavors. He's not alone. The name of his partner beats me in this moment, but let me just say that we should encourage persons such as this, and it should also show you what is possible. Imagine that Alex had the 600 million Prince Adeni Adeyemi claim that was shared. Imagine that he had that to work with in the education space. What do you think would happen to our education? Imagine that he has the capacity, he's enabled to do that beyond the Southeast. What kind of revolution do you think would happen in our educational space? So, shout out to Alex, doing a fantastic job, and everyone working with him. Shout out to you. You all deserve it. And I wonder what you would do if you add more than the shoestring budget that you guys currently work with. Oh, in the course of that week, it wouldn't be the first time I'll be seeing the story, but it was the first time I paid attention to certain details of the story. A gentleman, a Nigerian, a victim of Nigeria, an Ogoni boy, Gospel, Kinani, told, at least his family attempted to tell the story of the boy's sojourn through prison. One of the things that struck me about his incarceration lent credence to a legend I've had multiple times before I went to prison and whilst I was in prison. I've heard stories told of persons who are in prison serving other persons' sentences. It is interesting that this young man, the victim of Nigeria, Gospel Kinani, was in prison under another name. I believe it was Baridi Sunday. He was in prison listed under another name, and he left his home to get something to eat, and he ended up in prison for lost his years and from the stories I'm being told, equally lost his sanity. This is the Nigeria that we have built where the weakest are the most afflicted and are afforded no protection of the law. That is the Nigeria that we have built, but I'm speaking to it only as a window so that you may see the country that we have managed to construct in the absence of a space that may rightly be considered a citadel for the black race. This is the country we have built. And in that country, an entire judicial process from the police to the court to the prison, to all the public ombudsman, nobody in prison listened to this boy until he lost his mind in prison. And it took the perseverance of a lawyer, somebody who just happened to listen to his story, believe the story, and worked to free him. That is the judicial process that we have built. The judiciary is the last hope of the common man. But then what happens when the judiciary becomes as patently useless as the one responsible for the incarceration of this helpless citizen? What happens then? That was in the week that was. And then I noticed something in the week that was. Was heartbreaking to observe. There was a protest in Katsina, and the protest centered around allegations of blasphemy. So persons took to the streets in Katsina to protest that somebody blasphemed against the prophet. They were roused to passion. The streets were filled. I saw the video. But these are the same people daily terrorized by terrorists who are described to them as their brothers with nary a bleat or protest. These are the same people whose state government routinely have meetings with terrorists with nary a protest. These are the same people whose government sponsored terrorists to Hajj. Nobody protested. You see, one of the first things that signpost your humanity is the capacity to determine what is in your own enlightened, selfish interest. When your capacity to identify what is in your own enlightened, selfish interest becomes impaired to the point where you begin to fight in the army of your oppressor, then you have real problems. And that's where we are. How do I cry more than the bereaved? And who has been more bereaved than the persons victimized by reason of their residency and citizenship of Nigeria? Katsina has been a hotbed of terrorism. They call it banditry, but you and I know it's terrorism. But they are the ones protesting, fighting for God, but you wouldn't even be roused to fight for yourselves. This is madness. And if you're pointing accusing fingers at those fighting for God, what about you fighting for ethnicity? Fighting for partisan interest, ignoring what is even in your own interest, defending all evil. They found reasons in religiosity. You have your own many reasons for doing the things that you do. If I do not mention this in the week that was, I'll be doing myself a disfavor. So what do we say about the chairman, or is it a DG of the agency that does not exist, but has a budget, sits in the federal secretariat, but it does not exist. But we'll speak in detail to that as we proceed with this morning. It's 10 o'clock now. So let us start with the main business of the day. You know, fella has a song. It's titled BBC, Big Blind Country. One of the common refrain in that song comes from an African proverb. In fact, I think it's a cross-cultural proverb that you find across all races, really. It says, in the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So fella turned it into a song. For the country of the blind, a one-eyed man be king. For the country of king blind, everybody. So when the king is blind, everybody is blind. So fella was saying. So he started with the akara and kuli kuli thing that Mama Alakara, and by the way, Tinubu himself copyrighted the name. So it's okay to call Madam Tinubu Alakara now. So when Alakara came with the akara thing and everybody were busy responding to her, there is something about some of these issues. I hear them and they just keep grating away on my nerves, nagging away at my consciousness, and I'll keep pondering the thing. So the more I pondered the spirit behind the akara and kuli kuli thing, the more it reminded me of how the capacity of those who lead to envision is ultimately connected to what happens to the people. And another thing that kept coming to my mind is a proverb. I shared it recently, where I translated it to say that the eyes are useless when the mind is blind. The more I thought about this, the more I realized that there is a connection, there's a connecting thread between the capacity of leaders to envision and the product or fruit of their leadership. And then I remembered a piece I wrote years ago, is included in the book, Do Not Die in Their War. So I shared it independently during the course of the week. It's the one titled Aremu, the Lion Cub. And I'm going to use Aremu, the Lion Cub as a backdrop for the subject that I really want us to discuss: when the blind leads. So what led to Aremu, the Lion Cub? I went to IITA to write. IITA is the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. I grew up in Ibadan. So I had grown up watching the immaculate lawns of IITA as I would journey to my schools, both when I was at Fidelity Grammar School and later when I went to Olivet in Oyo. So it was a familiar sight, the immaculate green of its football pitch and the lawns were in contradistinction to the chaos of the DOC environment. So when I later learned that they had accommodation, like they had residences for those who might want to stay on their campus, I began to stay there whenever I felt like writing. So on this particular occasion, I happened to have gone there just around their 50th anniversary. And Obasanjo was invited as a guest to their 50th anniversary. This must have been in 2002. No, yeah, believe it must have been in, I can't remember now, but suffice to say that when I got there, I saw pictures of Obasanjo all over the wall. And if you've been within the precinct of the IITA, you know that you could be anywhere else in the world. Everything was centrally planned. You don't see the drain. They have their own dam. Everything is laid out like a typical American town. The American influence is obvious. So I was wondering, Obasanjo, these people built these in 50 years. Obasanjo had been involved in the governance and decision making in Nigeria for about that long. And here he was, a special guest of honor. He saw all these built out of the mess called Nigeria. But once you stepped outside the precinct of the IITA, all you found was putrefaction. So I was baffled. And I told myself, I must go and see the pinnacle of what Obasanjo built. So I went to his presidential library, went to spend the weekend there, went with my wife. And what I saw there led me to write the piece titled, I Removed the Lion Cub. But the relevance of that story to my lecture today will become obvious in a second. In that place, there was a lion cub. It was a cub when Obasanjo acquired it. It was given to him as a gift. So Obasanjo built a kennel for this cub. The kennel is no bigger than about, at most, maybe about 3 meters by 3. It's no bigger than the space you keep a boa bull, a big dog in. And this was the space in which Obasanjo kept this lion. I believe there were two of them. Yeah, there were two of them. One slightly older. And at the time I went there with my wife, these lions, I could initially not tell the difference between them and boa bulls. I thought these were boa bulls until I drew closer and I realized, especially because of the signage that said clearly, I removed the lion cub. And this is where I want to speak to the blindness of those who rule Nigeria. Obasanjo is probably one of the most intelligent of those who have governed this country. But when he was given a lion cub, the first thing that crossed his mind was to put it in a cage. He could not conceive of the fact that this lion was going to become this cub was going to become a grown lion that would require the space to roam. The entire space of Obasanjo turned into a zoo at his presidential library would not be enough for an adult lion to roam. But this adult lion was kept in a kennel like a dog in Obasanjo's zoo at his presidential library. What is the relevance? If the smartest, the most intelligent and disciplined of those who have governed Nigeria is so bereft in vision to the point where he would keep a lion cub in a kennel, forgetting the need for space as it grew older, what do you expect of these ones who are currently ruining Nigeria with zero vision? They don't even have the vanity or ego of Obasanjo to govern or constrain them. They have little or no understanding of history to constrain them. So we are being led by the blind who have zero understanding of the consequence of blindness or visionlessness on a country. There are 4 things that happens when the blind leads. In the abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. Nigeria reminds me of the Igbo proverb. It speaks to the fact that it questions, how do you explain a pregnant goat that is found dead in a yam barn? How? How do you explain it? In the abundance of natural resources, the Nigerian houses the most number of people living in multi-dimensional poverty. The lack of vision. Simple. In the abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. There is a yam barn. Nigeria is a yam barn, and there are pregnant goats dead all over the place. How do you explain it? How? The second thing that happens is visionary blindness. The same thing that tripped them up in one generation trips them up in the next. 6 years ago, almost a few months to it now, young Nigerians in unknown numbers were slaughtered by the Nigerian military at Lekki toll gate after a protest that was triggered essentially by the cruelty and high-handedness of the Nigerian police. Has it stopped? Visionary blindness, an inability to understand that until you have addressed the root cause of an issue, it will continue ad nauseum until it gets to the point of implosion or explosion. Nepotism is the centerpiece of governance in places ruled by blindness. And that is what you see in Nigeria. When Buhari was in power, every man in the presidency, more or less, were Fulanis. Tinubu is in power now. Almost everybody in his space are Yorubas. But is it to the advantage of the Yorubas or to their ruination? That is a question that those affected would have to be answering. The fourth thing that happens is that instead of planning for the long term, you have a people permanently fixated on election cycles. Look, one of the things that we must understand very clearly is that the loss of sight must not be confused for the loss of vision. This is to make clear that the likes of Stevie Wonder have vision. Ray Charles, he had vision. They might have lost their sight, but they retained the capacity to envision. Everything you see is made from what you don't see. The human imagination is the seat of his creativity. When a person looks at the totality of Nigeria and the many poor problems besetting Nigeria, and they speak from the abundance of their heart, and they say, one way of alleviating the poverty endemic in this country is to encourage people to start frying akara and kuli. Look, you speak to your frustrations when you abuse these persons, but you must look beyond your frustration to deal with the mindset of the persons who would believe that selling akara and kuli is what will bring people out of poverty in a world that has become transformed and has become a marketplace of ideas. The person in Nigeria who is capable of speaking in the language of this century may create value for persons living as far afield as India, China, and the United States. But the rulers of Nigeria, when they look at Nigerians, pretty much like Obasanjo looked at that lion and could not see he looked at the cub and could not see the lion in the cub. It's pretty much the same thing. The Nigerian state and its rulers, they look at the Nigerian and they cannot see the possibilities in the Nigerian. All they see are dispensable idiots, persons whose very humanity can be discounted. The teacher was killed in Orire. The president's daughter sent 2 bags of rice and 500,000. Brigadier generals are routinely murdered, and the state thinks nothing of it. They would even have parties on the day of the burial of these generals. Rank and files are killed on daily basis, and their very humanity discounted, and they were informed that these terrorists are their brothers. The capacity of the soldiers to fight deliberately eroded whilst terrorists are bearing superior firepower. Dogongide's men were injured. A police registered to the Nigerian, an helicopter registered to the Nigerian police was deployed to evacuate the wounded. A whole general was trapped. No helicopter was available to evacuate him until he was captured and killed. Let me be clear about something. The human imagination is the seat of its creativity. Between weaponized ignorance, weaponized religion, his capacity to imagine is already impaired. When you now have a people who have been so horribly and debilitatingly injured, being led by persons who sees them as only being worthy of frying akara and making kuli kuli. I had a health scare over the last week. Between diagnostic centers and hospitals, I ended up spending over 2 million naira to treat myself. How many persons selling ekpa and kuli kuli would be able to survive if they had to deal with the same thing? How many? Or these ailments or health conditions discriminate between those who can afford it and those who can't? What kind of health care is available to those who are being led by these blind people? What kind? What kind of mindset looks at these people and believe that all they deserve in their lives is to fry akara and kuli kuli? The social ladder that used to exist for the children of those frying akara and kuli kuli, are they still available today? I went to school in a generation when education was already being degraded, but we still received bursaries from some states. My school fees was 45 naira. Now you are giving people student loan and you are touting it as progressive politics. How many children born to the person frying kuli kuli and akara would survive in today's Nigeria? Where would such persons live in today's Nigeria? And let's be clear, I merely use Iyalakara as an analogy, as a type. Nigerians need to get to the point where they begin to understand that there is a difference between myopia and deliberate wickedness. Myopia is when governmental myopia is when those who rule a space might be said to be so blind that they cannot see what is good and differentiate what is evil. But I beg to disagree. I would actually argue that we've entered a phase where this is deliberate wickedness. The Bible says, my people perish for lack of vision. If a people perish for lack of vision, what do you think is happening to the Nigerian? What do you think is happening to the Nigerian? You have structured poverty in a place led by the blind. Because we must understand that whilst Nigeria is ruled by a feudal hegemony, there is only so much poverty that may be tolerated by a feudal hegemony before the feudal order would implode. If poverty gets to the point where the poor begin to starve, implosion becomes inevitable. France was a feudal order under Louis XVI. It imploded inevitably. America, before its independence 250 years ago, was a feudal order governed by the English crown. It imploded. It is inevitable. There is only so much poverty that a feudal order may employ to keep the feudal underlings in place. When it becomes as unbearable as the Nigerian situation has become, when brigandage becomes as widespread as it has become, what results inevitably are implosions. So when the blind leads, you have the kind of madness that you are seeing all over our country. These are the products of madness. On the flip side, if you go to Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 2, it says, a vision is for an appointed time. Though it tarries, wait for it. Write it down. Make it plain that those who read it may run with it. A blind person may have vision. He may sit down and dictate his vision to be written on tablets, not on paper, not on papyrus, on tablets. The power of documentation very clearly makes it impossible for a vision to become ambiguous. It says, write it down. It says, make it plain. This is clarity. Let it be plain so that anyone and everybody who reads it may run with it. He says, upon the tablets, the indestructibility of vision. Vision demands action. Run with it. Revelation without execution is useless. Look around Nigeria. Where is the vision governing our country? What is the overarching vision behind which the people have been energized and united? In the absence of vision, perversion are reigning supreme in Nigeria. Part of that perversion is what you've seen. They merely opened the window. I assure you that Adeniyi Adeyemi is the tip of the iceberg. There are multiple things going on. There is no governance happening in Nigeria any longer. It's just barefaced stealing. In the absence of the rule of law, the rulers are merely restrained by their appetite or their discipline. We're currently being ruled by those who have neither discipline nor anything altruistic to offer. And we are seeing the worst whenever the windows are peeled apart. There is nothing extraordinary about this Adeniyi Matthew thing. Absolutely nothing. This is what happens in places that are not governed by vision. When vision does not govern a space, perversion governs. Perversion reigns. When you give power that is not accountable to law, not subject to scrutiny, not amenable to control, insanity happens. What you see, what you are witnessing, is what you will see. It is a product of insanity, which is what you get in the absence of vision. Vision constrains. Vision tells you the things that you have to do and the things that need to be. Once you have vision, you don't throw your resources around like drunken sailors. You constrain your resources to pursue the execution of your vision. A country with vision does not spend the kind of humongous amount that we spend every time on the comfort of the rulers and ignore the education of children. A country with vision secures its borders. It protects its citizens.